I don't know where to even begin. Maybe with the truth. I was never my mother's favorite. I grew up in a house where love felt like a competition I never signed up for, and lost before I even knew the rules. My sister Claire was 2 years older, and from the day she was born, my mother seemed to pour every ounce of pride she had into her. Claire was beautiful, fearless, and destined for great things, according to her. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Me? I was the quiet one. I liked reading, drawing, and keeping to myself. I wasn't ugly. I know that now. But next to Claire's striking confidence and sharp cheekbones, I may as well have been invisible. My mother would smile politely at me during school recitals, but beam like the sun whenever Claire took the stage. Even my achievements were often twisted into compliments for Claire. I still remember bringing home a perfect report card in 10th grade. I was so proud, eager to show my mom. She looked at the paper, smiled faintly, and said, "Well, I guess intelligence runs in the family. Claire must have passed those good genes down to you." I was 15, and I cried myself to sleep that night. By the time I turned 20, I had resigned myself to being the other daughter. I kept my head down, worked hard in college, and tried to build my own identity. That's when I met Ethan. Ethan wasn't like anyone I had met before. He was warm, charming, and had this easygoing laugh that made me forget how anxious I usually felt around people. We were both business majors, often stuck in the same classes, and before long we were studying together, grabbing coffee, and texting late into the night. When he asked me out officially, I thought my heart would burst. For once, I felt like someone truly saw me, not the shadow of my sister or the girl who could never quite live up to her mother's expectations. Our relationship grew naturally. Ethan was ambitious but grounded, always encouraging me to speak my mind. He told me he loved how thoughtful I was, how I noticed the little things others overlooked. I didn't realize how desperately I had needed to hear those words until he said them. But even in my happiness, my mother's voice lingered. She met Ethan once, and instead of simply being supportive, she gave him a smile that was more like an appraisal. "Ah, you're the young man my daughter's been hiding from me," she said, shaking his hand. "Nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Lawson," Ethan replied, polite as ever. Her eyes flicked to me, then back to him. "You seem like a man who knows what he wants. That's refreshing." It sounded like a compliment, but I caught the undertone. "Do you really know what you want, being with her?" Over dinner, she asked Ethan 100 questions about his career goals, family, and ambitions. Far more than she had ever asked me about my own life. Claire was there too, of course, draped in a designer dress and laughing loudly at all of Ethan's jokes. I told myself it was nothing. Claire was always like that. Center of attention, effortless charm. Ethan was my boyfriend, and he'd chosen me. That was what mattered. But as the months passed, I started noticing things, subtle at first, like my mother accidentally mentioning Claire in conversations with Ethan. "Oh, Claire just got promoted again. She's always been so driven. You two should talk sometime. She could give you tips about leadership." Or, "Ethan, you really should come to Sunday dinner more often. Claire will be there, and she's such fun company. You'd get along famously." I brushed it off, but deep down, a gnawing worry began to grow. One evening, after Ethan dropped me off, I went inside and overheard my mother on the phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but when I heard my name, I froze in the hallway. Yes, she's sweet, but Ethan needs someone stronger, someone who can challenge him. Claire would be perfect. She's always been the kind of woman who can keep up with a man like him. I felt like the air had been punched out of me. I wanted to confront her right then, but when I stepped into the kitchen, she smiled as though nothing had happened and asked how my evening was. My throat tightened. I said nothing, retreating to my room like a coward. The next day, I tried to convince myself I'd misheard. My mother couldn't, say something so cruel. But then it happened again, and again. Every interaction between my mother and Ethan started to feel like a test I was failing. She would praise Claire endlessly, drop hints about her confidence and drive, and somehow always steer the conversation toward why Ethan deserved the best. I started having nightmares about losing him. I hated myself for being so insecure, but my mother had planted the seed and watered it with every sly comment. Ethan, for his part, seemed oblivious. He still held my hand, texted me sweet messages, and talked about our future. But when I mentioned my discomfort, he would laugh it off. "Babe, you're overthinking it," he'd say. "Your mom is just intense. And Claire? She's your sister. There's nothing there." I wanted to believe him. Good, I needed to believe him. But deep down, a quiet dread was growing, one I couldn't shake. It all came to a head at my mother's annual holiday party. As always, she had invited a long list of her friends and colleagues, and Claire was the star of the evening. Ethan and I arrived together, and almost immediately, my mother whisked him away, leaving me to fend for myself. An hour later, I found him in the corner of the living room, my mother laughing at something Ethan had said while Claire stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. I told myself it was nothing, just a friendly gesture. But when Ethan turned to look at me, there was a flicker, something in his eyes I couldn't quite name. Surprise? Guilt? That was the first night I felt the ground beneath my feet begin to crack. And it wouldn't be the last. After that holiday party, something in the air between Ethan and me shifted. It was subtle at first, like a draft sneaking in through a barely cracked window, but I felt it all the same. His texts became slightly shorter, his calls a little less frequent. He still said all the right words. "I love you, I miss you, can't wait to see you." But I could feel the warmth draining out of them. I tried to tell myself it was just my anxiety talking, the insecurities my mother had been drilling into me for years. But deep down, I knew something was slipping away. A week later, I went to his apartment unannounced. Ethan wasn't the kind of guy who minded surprises. At least, he never used to. When he opened the door, his face registered something before he smiled. Shock? Panic? I couldn't tell. "Hey, babe," he said, leaning in for a kiss that didn't quite land on my lips. Inside, the apartment was unusually tidy, as though he'd done a quick cleanup just before I arrived. I dropped my bag on the couch and asked about his day. He answered distractedly, fiddling with his phone before setting it face down on the coffee table. I don't know why, but my gaze lingered on that phone like it held the answers to every question I was too scared to ask. We ordered takeout, watched a movie, and went to bed. He held me, but his mind felt elsewhere. I fell asleep with my head on his chest, wondering if I'd imagined the way his heart raced when a notification buzzed on his phone earlier. The next day, my best friend Tara invited me for brunch. She'd always been my rock, the one person who saw through my mother's favoritism and constant comparisons. As soon as I walked into the cafe, she took one look at me and frowned. "Spill," she said, sliding a latte across the table. I told her about Ethan's sudden distance, the holiday party, and the way Claire had been hovering around him like a moth to a flame. Tara's lips thinned. "You think something's going on?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe I'm being paranoid. But my mom's been pushing this narrative that Claire's better for him. What if she's gotten into his head?" Tara reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Listen to me. If Ethan's worth keeping, he won't let anyone, not even your mother, sway him. But if he's not, better to know now than later." I wanted to believe her. A few days later, I stopped by my mother's house to pick up some old boxes she'd been nagging me about. Claire was there, lounging on the couch in leggings and a crop top, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up at me and smirked. "Oh, hey, stranger." "Hey," I muttered, heading toward the attic. As I passed the living room, I caught a glimpse of her screen. Ethan's name was at the top of an open chat window. I froze. Claire noticed my pause and tilted the phone away, her smirk widening. "Something wrong?" My mouth went dry. "Why are you texting Ethan?" Her shrug was infuriatingly casual. "We just friends. Relax." "Friends," I repeated, my voice cracking. She rolled her eyes. "You're so dramatic. Mom said I should get to know him better. Networking, you know? Not everything's about you, little sister." I wanted to scream, to snatch the phone out of her hands, to demand she tell me exactly what they'd been talking about. Instead, I turned and stormed upstairs, my hand shaking. That night, I confronted Ethan. "Are you texting Clay?" I asked bluntly. He hesitated. Too long. "Yeah, but it's nothing. She was just asking for career advice." "Career advice?" I repeated, my stomach twisting. "She's thinking about switching industries. Your mom thought I could give her some pointers," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. I wanted to believe him, but every instinct in my body screamed that he wasn't telling me the whole truth. The weeks that followed were torture. Ethan grew more distant, while Claire seemed to glow with a new, almost smug confidence. My mother, meanwhile, became bolder in her comparisons. "Claire and Ethan really get along, don't they?" she mused one Sunday over dinner, her eyes gleaming. "They have so much in common. It's like they bring out the best in each other." I clenched my fork so tightly it left an imprint on my palm. That night, I cried in my car for 20 minutes before driving home. Then came the day that shattered what was left of my illusions. Ethan asked to meet somewhere private. I knew. God, I knew before he even opened his mouth. He sat across from me at a quiet cafe, fidgeting with his coffee cup. "I don't know how to say this without hurting you," he began. "Just say it," I whispered, my voice trembling. I've developed feelings for Claire," he said, his words slicing through me like glass. "Your mom made me realize that we're better matched. I didn't mean for this to happen, but I can't ignore it anymore." For a moment, the world went silent. I stared at him, my heart pounding, my mind screaming. "So what, you're leaving me for her?" His expression twisted with guilt. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I tried to fight it. But Claire understands me in ways you don't." The betrayal was so sharp it stole my breath. "You let my mother convince you that I wasn't enough," I said, tears streaming down my face. "And you let her hand you my sister like some prize." "Please, don't make this harder," he said, reaching for my hand. I jerked it away as though his touch burned me. I left without another word. A month later, I learned through social media that Ethan and Claire were officially together. 3 months after that, they announced their engagement. My mother called me the night they got engaged. I let it go to voicemail, but later, her words echoed in my head. "Sweetheart, I know this hurts now, but it's for the best. Ethan needed someone stronger, someone like Claire. You'll find someone eventually." That was the night I packed my bags and left. I cut ties with all of them, my mother, my sister, Ethan. I moved to another city, found a tiny apartment, and started over. I thought I'd never stop hurting. But somewhere, beneath the pain, a spark of determination flared. I would never let them make me feel less than again. And I would never forgive them. I left in the middle of the night. No long, emotional goodbyes, no explanations. Just a hastily packed suitcase, my savings account transferred to a new bank, and a one-way ticket to a city far enough away that I could pretend the last 20-something years of my life hadn't happened. The first few weeks were a blur of exhaustion and grief. I stayed in a small studio apartment that smelled faintly of paint thinner, my mattress on the floor and boxes doubling as tables. Every day I went through the motions, job hunting, eating instant noodles, crying in the shower, but inside, I felt hollow. I'd deleted Ethan's number, blocked Claire and my mother on every platform, and told Tara to only give out my new address to emergency contacts. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone. At first, the silence was suffocating. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with the phantom buzz of my phone, half expecting a message from Ethan saying it was all a mistake, that he'd chosen me after all. But the screen stayed dark. And in that darkness, something in me began to shift. I found a job at a logistics firm, starting at the bottom as an administrative assistant. The pay wasn't great, but it was stable. More importantly, it was mine. I threw myself into work, staying late, learning everything I could, and volunteering for projects no one else wanted. It was hard, harder than I expected, but every small win felt like a victory reclaimed. The first time my boss praised me in a team meeting, I fought back tears. "Good work, Lawson," he said. "Keep this up, and we might have to promote you sooner than expected." Lawson. For the first time, my last name didn't feel like a reminder of the family I'd left behind. It was just me. Outside of work, I forced myself to build a life. I signed up for evening classes, business analytics, something I'd always been interested in but never pursued because my mother thought it was too technical for me. I joined a gym, not to punish my body but to feel stronger in it. Slowly, I started meeting people. Co-workers invited me out for drinks. My neighbor, a retired teacher named Mrs. Green, started leaving baked goods by my door with little notes. "Thought you might need a pick-me-up today." One Friday evening, I found myself at a rooftop bar, laughing at a joke one of my colleagues told, and realized it had been months since I'd thought about Ethan and Claire. The ache was still there, buried deep, but it no longer consumed me. Of course, healing wasn't a straight line. There were setbacks, nights when I'd scroll through old photos of Ethan and me, remembering the girl who believed his promises. Times when a random song on the radio would drag me back to those nights we spent dreaming about our future together. But each time, the pain felt a little less sharp. I started keeping a journal, writing letters I'd never send. In one, I told Ethan that I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. In another, I wrote to Claire, admitting that her betrayal had hurt more than his. And in the hardest one of all, I wrote to my mother. "You broke me in ways you'll never understand, but I'm learning to live without needing your approval." A year passed. I got promoted to junior executive, signed a lease on a nicer apartment, and treated myself to real furniture that didn't come flat-packed. I even started dating again. Nothing serious at first, coffee dates, a few dinners. But each one taught me something. That my worth wasn't tied to whether someone chose me over someone else, that I didn't need to shrink myself to make others comfortable. I was learning to take up space. 2 years after I'd left, my company sent me to a networking conference. I almost didn't go. The thought of mingling with strangers still made my stomach knot. But something in me whispered that I'd come too far to keep hiding. That's where I met Lucas. We bumped into each other, literally, near the coffee stand, my latte spilling across both our shoes. I stammered an apology, mortified, but he just laughed. "No harm done," he said, handing me a napkin. Besides, it's probably the most memorable way I've met someone at one of these things. We ended up talking for an hour, missing half the keynote speech. Lucas was warm and funny, with an easy confidence that made me forget how nervous I usually felt. When he asked if I wanted to grab dinner after the conference, I hesitated for half a second before saying yes. That dinner turned into a second, then a third. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. Lucas liked me, without reservations, comparisons, or conditions. As our relationship deepened, I told him about my past in bits and pieces. "I'm not close to my family," I said one evening over wine. "Bad blood?" he asked gently. I hesitated. More like, they made me believe I wasn't enough. I had to leave to figure out that I was. Lucas reached across the table, taking my hand. "Well, I'm glad you did. Otherwise, we might never have met." I smiled, and for the first time, I believed it. By the time Lucas proposed, I had built a life that felt truly mine. We got married in a small ceremony surrounded by friends and colleagues, my chosen family. I didn't invite my mother or Claire. Tara was my maid of honor, beaming at me like the sister I'd always wished for. Mrs. Green cried through the entire ceremony, and when Lucas whispered, "You're my everything," as he slipped the ring onto my finger, I knew, deep in my bones, that I had finally broken free of the cage my family had built around me. Years later, when I stood at the helm of my own company, I looked around at everything I'd built, the career, the marriage, the friends who felt like family, and realized something profound. I didn't just survive what they did to me. I thrived because of it, and I would never let them take that away from me. But fate, it seems, wasn't done with me yet, because one evening, as Lucas and I discussed plans for an upcoming company gala, a celebration of our success and the people who had supported us, he asked, "Should we invite your family? I know things are complicated, but maybe it's time to show them how far you've come." I hesitated, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth. The idea made my stomach twist, but there was a strange, undeniable pull. Maybe it was time. Maybe it was time for them to see the woman they tried to break, standing taller than ever. Lucas was the kind of man I didn't believe existed anymore, at least not for me. After Ethan and Claire, after the years of feeling like I had to fight for every scrap of affection, Lucas's love felt steady, effortless. I met him at that networking conference, but what stuck with me wasn't his job title or his resume, it was the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. He had this unshakable calm, a quiet confidence that didn't need to overpower anyone else. We started slowly. Our first few dates were dinners that stretched late into the night, the conversations flowing so easily that hours passed unnoticed. He was curious about my opinions, genuinely interested in my thoughts, and he had a way of making me feel like my words carried weight. I wasn't used to that. At first, I held back. I kept my past locked away, not out of shame, but because it felt like an old wound I wasn't ready to peel open. But Lucas had a patience that was disarming. He never pushed, he just listened when I was ready to talk. One evening, sitting on his couch with a glass of wine, I told him about Ethan, how my mother had spent years undermining me, how she'd pushed Ethan toward my sister until he left me for her. Lucas's jaw tightened, his usually warm eyes hardening for a moment. "They made you feel like you weren't enough," he said quietly. I nodded. I had to leave to figure out that I was. He reached for my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "Their loss," he said simply, and somehow those two words undid something in me that had been wound tight for years. Lucas wasn't just kind, he was driven. He'd started his own company in his mid-20s and had grown it into one of the most respected names in the industry. But he never made me feel overshadowed. Instead, he encouraged me to take risks, to believe in myself in ways no one else ever had. When I mentioned my dream of starting my own analytics firm someday, he didn't laugh or tell me it was unrealistic. Instead, he asked, "Okay, so what's step one?" With his support, I took that first step, then the next. Within a year, my firm was off the ground. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was steering my own ship. Lucas was by my side the entire way, not as a crutch but as a partner. Our relationship wasn't perfect, no relationship is, but even our arguments felt different. We disagreed, we worked through it, and we came out stronger. There were no power games, no backhanded jabs, none of the constant comparisons I'd grown up with. I realized one evening, as we were cooking dinner together and laughing over a failed attempt at homemade pasta, that I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. I trusted him, completely. When Lucas proposed, it wasn't some grand, orchestrated spectacle. We were hiking one weekend, and he led me to the top of a hill that overlooked the city. "I wanted to ask you something," he said, pulling out a ring that gleamed in the fading sunlight. My breath caught. "Will you marry me?" I didn't even hesitate. "Yes," I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. We were married in a small, intimate ceremony. Tara stood by my side as my maid of honor, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Green, my sweet neighbor, was there too, clutching a bouquet and sobbing happily. I didn't invite my mother, or Claire, or Ethan. For the first time, that choice didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like freedom. Married life with Lucas was nothing like what I'd imagined growing up. We were partners in every sense of the word. We celebrated each other's wins, weathered each other's bad days, and built a life that felt solid, secure, and ours. Lucas's company continued to grow, and my analytics firm gained traction. Before long, we were being invited to industry events as one of those power couples I used to roll my eyes at. But even with all the success, Lucas remained the same man who had spilled coffee on me at that conference, grounded, funny, and endlessly supportive. One evening, over dinner in our apartment, Lucas looked up from his plate with a mischievous smile. "So, big milestone coming up," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, your firm's 5-year anniversary. That's huge. We should celebrate." I shrugged. I was thinking maybe a dinner with the team. Lucas shook his head. "No way. This calls for something bigger. A gala, maybe? Invite your clients, partners, everyone who's been part of your journey. Show the world what you've built." The idea made my stomach flip. A gala. A chance to showcase how far I'd come. But then another thought crept in, one that both thrilled and terrified me. What if I invited my family? I said slowly. Lucas set down his fork. "Are you sure?" I hesitated. "I don't know. Part of me wants them to see this, the life I built without them, the woman they tried to break but couldn't." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Then do it. Not for them, for you." Planning the gala became a whirlwind of caterers, venue tours, and guest lists. My team was ecstatic, throwing themselves into every detail. Lucas was my rock through it all, keeping me grounded when the pressure threatened to overwhelm me. One evening, as I sat on the couch going through our SVPs, I saw it, an email from my mother. "We'd be delighted to attend. Claire and Ethan will come too. It's been too long, sweetheart." My hands trembled as I read the words. Ethan, Claire, my mother, all under the same roof as me. For years, I'd imagined this moment, seeing them again, no longer the girl they discarded, but the woman who rose from the ashes. Now it was happening, and I couldn't tell if the flutter in my chest was fear or anticipation. The gala had started as a simple idea, just a celebration for the 5-year anniversary of my company. But as the weeks passed, it transformed into something far bigger, a culmination of everything I'd worked for since the day I walked out of my mother's house with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. Lucas threw himself into the planning with the same enthusiasm he brought to everything in our lives. He wanted it to be perfect, not just for me but for what it represented. "This is your night," he reminded me every time I got caught up in the logistics. "You've earned every second of it." I kept telling myself that. But in the quiet moments, alone at my desk after everyone had gone home or lying awake at night staring at the ceiling, my thoughts drifted to the guest list, specifically 3 names that still had the power to make my chest tighten: my mother, Claire, and Ethan. Sending them the invitations had been a deliberate choice. I could have kept my life sealed off, the way I had for years. But something in me wanted them to see me as I was now, no longer the girl they dismissed as too quiet and not enough. When their SVPs came back, all 3 marked attending. For days, I couldn't shake the mix of dread and anticipation swirling inside me. Tara, of course, saw right through me. "You're nervous," she said one afternoon as we were doing a final walkthrough of the venue. "I'm fine," I lied, adjusting the placement of a centerpiece for the 3rd time. Tara raised an eyebrow. "You've moved that vase 6 inches left and right 5 times in the past minute. You're not fine." I sighed, dropping my hands. I don't know what I expected. Part of me thought they wouldn't come. "And part of you wanted them to," she said gently. I didn't deny it. Tara squeezed my shoulder. "Listen, whatever happens, you're not the same girl they hurt. You built this. You have people who love you now, real family. Don't let them make you forget that." As the day of the gala approached, the pressure mounted. My team worked tirelessly to make every detail perfect. The lighting, the music, the seating arrangements. Lucas and I attended endless meetings with vendors, our calendars jammed with fittings and tastings. But no amount of planning could prepare me for the emotional storm brewing inside me. I dreamed about them, vivid, unsettling dreams where I was back in my childhood home, my mother's voice echoing, "Claire's stronger, better for him." I'd wake in a cold sweat, Lucas pulling me close, murmuring, "You're safe. It's over." Except it wasn't over. Not yet. 2 nights before the gala, I received a text from an unknown number. "Looking forward to seeing you. It's been a long time." It took me a moment to realize it was Claire. I stayed at the screen, my stomach twisting. No apology. No acknowledgement of the years of silence. Just a reminder that the woman who'd once stolen the man I loved would soon be standing across from me. I didn't reply. On the morning of the gala, Lucas found me sitting on the edge of our bed, still in my robe, staring blankly at the floor. "Talk to me," he said softly, kneeling in front of me. "I keep thinking about what they'll say," I admitted. "What if they still see me as that girl, the one who wasn't enough?" Lucas took my hands, his gaze steady. "You're not that girl anymore. And even if they can't see that, everyone else in that room will. You don't need their approval, not anymore." His words anchored me, the tension in my chest loosening just a little. By the time we arrived at the venue that evening, the anxiety had been replaced by a strange, electric anticipation. Guests were already mingling, the soft hum of conversation blending with the music. My team beamed as they guided people to their seats, proud of what we'd created. Lucas looked devastatingly handsome in his tailored suit, his presence a constant, grounding force. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. I took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." As the evening unfolded, I moved through the crowd, greeting clients, colleagues, and friends. Compliments and congratulations flowed freely, each one chipping away at the insecurities that had haunted me for years. But then, near the entrance, I saw them. My mother, elegant as ever, her expression carefully composed. Claire, radiant in a gown that probably cost more than my first car. And Ethan, his arm draped around her waist, scanning the room with a guarded look. For a moment, the noise of the gala faded, replaced by the pounding of my heart. They hadn't seen me yet. I had a choice, slip away or face them head-on. I straightened my shoulders and crossed the room. "Hello," I said, my voice calm, even. 3 heads turned. For the briefest second, their expressions faltered, surprise flickering across their faces before my mother's smile snapped into place. "Sweetheart," she said, stepping forward to kiss my cheek. "You look wonderful. This is quite the event." "Thank you," I replied, my tone polite but distant. Claire's gaze swept over me, her smile tight. "You've changed." "Yes," I said simply. "I have." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his mouth opening as if to speak, then closing again. "Excuse me," Lucas's voice came from behind me. He slid an arm around my waist, his touch warm, reassuring. I turned to introduce him. "Everyone, this is my husband, Lucas." As they registered his name, a ripple of recognition passed over their faces. Quick, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my pulse quicken. My mother's composure faltered for just a heartbeat. Claire's smile wavered. Ethan's jaw tightened, his knuckles white around his glass. I didn't know why their reactions were so visceral, but in that moment, I realized something important. Whatever they were feeling, it wasn't pride. It was something closer to Faye. The music played softly in the background as I led Lucas through the crowd, weaving between groups of well-dressed guests congratulating me on the success of the gala. The room was filled with warm laughter, clinking glasses, and the subtle hum of celebration. Yet, beneath it all, I could feel a tension growing, not just inside me, but palpable in the air where my family stood. I glanced back at them one last time before returning my focus to the conversations around me. My mother's smile was tight, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place flashing in her eyes. Claire, ever so composed, was leaning slightly toward Ethan, whose jaw remained clenched and eyes flickered nervously around the room. Lucas squeezed my waist gently. "Ready for the next round of hell?" he whispered, a small smirk playing on his lips. I laughed softly, shaking my head. I'm ready for whatever comes. The evening progressed, and guests settled into their seats for my speech. As I took the stage, my heart was steady, calm and confident in a way it never had been before. I spoke about the journey of my company, the challenges overcome, the triumphs celebrated. I told stories of late nights, early mornings, and the determination it took to rise from nothing to where I stood now. I didn't mention the betrayals or the family that tried to break me, but every word carried the weight of my journey. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. Lucas stood and applauded louder than anyone else, pride shining in his eyes. After the speech, the event became more relaxed. Guests mingled, shared drinks, and danced. I moved through the crowd with Lucas, feeling a sense of belonging I hadn't known was possible. But then, the moment came. Claire approached us, a glass of champagne in hand, her expression carefully neutral. Lucas, isn't it? She said, voice smooth as silk. Lucas nodded politely. Yes, that's me. She smiled thinly. I hear you've done well for yourself. Quite impressive. Lucas returned the smile but said nothing. My mother and Ethan lingered just behind her, watching. Lucas's gaze flicked toward Ethan for a split second before turning back to Claire. I'm glad to hear you've been doing well, Lucas said carefully. Suddenly, I noticed a shift in Ethan's posture, tense, almost defensive. Do you know each other? I asked quietly, my heart pounding. Lucas hesitated, then nodded slowly. We've crossed paths professionally, yes. Claire's smile slipped. More than just professionally, I'd imagine. My mother's eyes narrowed slightly. I looked from Lucas to them, confusion growing. Wait, what is this about? I asked. Lucas took a breath, then spoke with quiet authority. Ethan worked under me at my company, he said. For a time, he was my employee. The room seemed to hold its breath. Ethan's face went pale. Why didn't you ever tell me? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Lucas's eyes were steady. Because it's complicated. Ethan's tenure there ended badly. The truth spilled out in a few brief sentences. Lucas explained how Ethan had made decisions that cost the company money, how he'd let arrogance and entitlement cloud his judgment, and how those mistakes had led to his dismissal. I didn't fire him out of spite, Lucas said. I gave him every chance to make it right. But he couldn't. Ethan's face twisted with shame and anger. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, her earlier confidence cracking. Claire looked as though she was about to say something, then bit her lip. The atmosphere in the room shifted from festive to tense. Guests nearby began to murmur quietly. I felt a strange sense of power rise inside me, not vengeance, exactly, but the satisfaction of finally seeing the truth out in the open. Lucas stepped forward, addressing the gathering crowd. I stand here with the woman who has overcome more than most. She's built this company from the ground up, without favors, without shortcuts, and I'm proud to call her my wife. Cheers erupted again, but my mother, Claire, and Ethan stayed frozen, their faces pale. The mask of superiority they'd worn for years had crumbled. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Lucas and I stood by the grand window overlooking the city lights. I turned to him, gratitude filling my chest. Thank you, I said softly. For what? For standing by me. For being my strength. He smiled. Always. In that moment, I realized I had reclaimed my story, not as the girl they underestimated, but as a woman who rose above betrayal, who built her own empire, and who had the love she deserved. And nothing, not my mother, my sister, or Ethan, could take that away from me. The night after the gala, I barely slept. The adrenaline was still coursing through me. But beneath the exhaustion, a strange calm settled. For years, I'd carried the weight of my mother's favoritism, Claire's betrayal, and Ethan's rejection like a scar I couldn't heal. But now, after Lucas laid bare the truth in front of them all, something shifted. My phone buzzed early the next morning. It was a message from Claire. I hesitated before opening it. I didn't know you were so strong. I'm sorry for everything. I stared at the words, my heart pounding. Was this an olive branch? Or just empty remorse? Before I could reply, or decide not to, the doorbell rang. Standing on my doorstep was my mother, her face pale, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded and stepped aside, letting her in. The silence between us was heavy, years of unspoken pain filling the room. She sat down, wringing her hands. "I never meant to hurt you," she began. "I thought I was protecting you by pushing Claire. I thought she was stronger, better equipped to handle someone like Ethan. I was wrong." I listened, torn between years of resentment and a flicker of compassion. "I was selfish," she continued. "I wanted what I thought was best for you both, but I didn't realize how much it would break you. Seeing you tonight, it was like seeing a stranger. The woman you become is someone I barely recognize." Her voice cracked, and tears spilled down her cheeks. For a moment, I wanted to say everything I'd held inside, the years of pain, the nights I cried alone, the betrayal I never expected from my own family. But instead, I took a deep breath. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. "It doesn't erase the past, but maybe it's a start." Over the next weeks, conversations flowed between us, tentative and fragile, but honest. Claire reached out again, this time with a longer message. "I was jealous and scared, and I made terrible choices. I want to make things right, if you'll let me." Her words felt like a tentative bridge across a chasm, but trust isn't rebuilt overnight. Ethan, on the other hand, retreated into silence. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he struggled to find work after Lucas's company terminated his contract. The man who once believed he could take what he wanted without consequences was forced to confront his failures. In a way, I felt pity, not for him, but for the man who had wasted so many years chasing illusions instead of respect. Meanwhile, my company thrived. The gala had opened doors I never thought possible, and with Lucas's unwavering support, I expanded my business into new markets. Each success was a quiet victory against the past. But the most profound change was within me. I no longer felt defined by the wounds inflicted by my family. I was free to be who I wanted, a leader, a wife, a woman who had earned every ounce of her happiness. One afternoon, as I sat in my office overlooking the city skyline, Lucas joined me with a cup of coffee. "I'm proud of you," he said softly. I smiled, resting my head on his shoulder. "We did it." He kissed my temple. "We. Always." The path ahead wasn't perfect. There would be days when the memories resurfaced, when old fears whispered in the dark. But I knew now that I was stronger than my past, stronger than the betrayals, stronger than the shadows cast by my mother's choices. And with that strength, I was ready to face whatever the future held. The days after the gala marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just in my life but in my family's, whether they realized it or not. The past wasn't erased, nor were the scars forgotten, but the space between us began to fill with cautious hope. It started with small gestures. My mother reached out more often. Not just the formal calls she made out of obligation, but genuine conversations where she asked about my life, my work, even Lucas. There were no demands or comparisons, just tentative questions. One afternoon, she surprised me with lunch at a small cafe I loved. As we sat sipping coffee, she said quietly, "I want to be better. For you. For us." The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. I wanted to say no, to guard myself. But I realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the pain, it was about choosing to heal. Claire's messages became less guarded. She sent updates about her life, asked about mine, and even congratulated me on my recent business wins. When she asked if we could meet, I hesitated. But with Tara's encouragement, I agreed. The meeting was awkward at first, filled with silences and half-smiles. But as we talked, I saw a different side of Claire, one that was regretful, vulnerable, and eager to make amends. She admitted her jealousy and mistakes, and though the wounds she caused were deep, the act of facing them together felt like the first step toward something resembling sisterhood. Ethan remained distant, but the absence of hostility between us was itself a relief. We crossed paths once at a mutual friend's gathering. The air was thick with unspoken words, but we exchanged polite nods, a quiet acknowledgement that while our chapter was closed, we wished each other no harm. Meanwhile, my business flourished. With Lucas by my side, we expanded into new markets, hired passionate teams, and built a company culture that valued respect and integrity. At work, I found myself mentoring young women who reminded me of the girl I once was, uncertain, underestimated, but fiercely determined. Helping them navigate their own journeys became a source of pride and purpose. Home life with Lucas grew even richer. We celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, and quiet Sunday mornings wrapped in blankets and laughter. Our love was a refuge, a testament to resilience and the power of second chances. One evening, as we walked hand in hand through a park illuminated by twinkling fairy lights, Lucas turned to me. "You've come so far," he said softly. "I'm honored to be part of your story." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "And I'm grateful for every chapter. But forgiveness isn't a destination, it's a journey. Some days were harder than others. Old memories would surface unexpectedly, a phrase my mother once said, a glance from Claire that echoed past betrayals. Yet, each time, I reminded myself of who I was now, a woman who chose strength over bitterness, love over resentment. The most profound change came when I finally let go of the need for my family's approval. I realized I didn't need their validation to define my worth. I was enough on my own terms. At a family gathering a few months later, surrounded by those I loved and those I was learning to love again, I felt a deep sense of peace. My mother caught my eye across the room and smiled, a genuine, warm smile. Claire gave me a tentative hug, and Ethan offered a nod of respect. In that moment, I understood that healing wasn't about perfection or forgetting the past, it was about embracing growth and the possibility of new beginnings. As I raised a glass to toast the night, I felt the weight of the years lift. I was no longer the girl my mother had tried to replace. I was the woman who had built a life of her own, forged from pain but shining with resilience. And that was more than enough. 5 years after the gala, the echoes of that night still lingered in my memory, not as a source of anxiety but as a reminder of how far I'd come. My company had grown beyond anything I once dared to imagine. Offices in 3 countries, partnerships with top firms, and a team that treated our mission like their own. I often thought about the girl who once left her mother's house in the dead of night with a single suitcase. She wouldn't have believed the life we built, a home filled with warmth and laughter, a husband whose love was steady and unshakable, and a career that stood as a testament to resilience. Lucas called it our legacy, though I'd only recently begun to think of it that way. One afternoon, during a leadership retreat for my team, I stood on stage addressing nearly 200 employees. When I started this company, I had nothing, no connections, no safety net, just an idea and a lot of determination. But what I did have was a belief that we could create something better, a place where people are valued for who they are, not who others expect them to be. The applause that followed filled the room with an almost tangible pride. I glanced at Lucas in the front row. He gave me a subtle nod, that quiet, grounding smile that had become my anchor. A few weeks later, an unexpected opportunity arrived, a keynote invitation for a global business summit. It was the kind of event my mother would have once dismissed as too ambitious for me. Now, I was one of the main speakers. The night before the summit, my mother called. "I've been following your work," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "You've built something incredible. I'm proud of you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. "I didn't think I'd ever hear you say that," I admitted. "I didn't think I'd ever deserve to," she replied quietly. The summit itself was a whirlwind. Panels, interviews, and the keynote itself, which received a standing ovation. Afterward, as I mingled with attendees, Claire approached me. "I watched your speech online," she said. "You were amazing. I wanted to tell you that I finally understand why you had to leave. You needed to grow away from us." I stared at her for a moment. There was no bitterness in her tone, only quiet sincerity. I said, "But I'm glad we're here now." She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. Ethan's journey was slower. He'd struggled for years after his departure from Lucas's company, but eventually he found stable footing in a smaller firm. When we finally spoke at a family gathering, it was brief but honest. "I didn't treat you fairly," he said. "I was arrogant, and I'm sorry." It wasn't absolution, but it was enough. Through it all, Lucas remained my constant. Our marriage wasn't without its challenges, late nights, demanding schedules, but we faced them together. When I doubted myself, He reminded me of the woman who had once rebuilt her entire life from the ground up. "We built this together," he would say, "but it's your strength that made it possible." One evening, as we sat on the balcony of our home overlooking the city, I found myself reflecting on everything we'd endured, the betrayals, the heartbreak, the long climb toward healing. "Do you ever think about the night of the gala?" I asked. Lucas smiled faintly. "All the time. That was the night they finally saw you as I've always seen you, unstoppable." I leaned against him, warmth blooming in my chest. "Sometimes I think I needed that moment as much as they did." "Maybe," he said, "but your legacy isn't proving them wrong. It's building a life that feels right." And he was right. My legacy wasn't the look on my family's faces when they realized the man I married was everything they once told me I couldn't have. It wasn't the wealth, the accolades, or the influence. It was the woman I'd become, the one who rose from betrayal to build a life filled with purpose, love, and the kind of strength that couldn't be shaken. 10 years after the night of the gala, I found myself standing in the grand hall of a new headquarters building, my company's new home. It wasn't just an office, it was a symbol of everything I had built. The walls gleamed with glass and light, the lobby alive with the energy of people who believed in the vision we created. Lucas stood by my side, his hand warm in mine, and Tara hovered nearby, beaming with pride. A crowd of employees, partners, and guests gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, their voices a low hum of excitement. But what caught my attention wasn't the crowd. It was the small group off to the side, my mother, Claire, and Ethan. They were here because I'd invited them. For the first time in years, I felt no dread, no apprehension, just peace. When I walked over, my mother's eyes brimmed with tears. "You've done more than I ever imagined," she whispered, her voice shaking. "And I'm sorry for all of it." I nodded. "I know, and I forgive you." Those 3 words weren't easy, but they were true. Holding on to the anger had only chained me to the past. Letting it go set me free. Claire stepped forward next. "You were always stronger," she admitted, her voice low. "I see that now. I spent years trying to compete with you when I should have just been proud of you." For a moment, we simply looked at each other, the distance between us shrinking in a way I never thought possible. Then I opened my arms, and she stepped into the hug, trembling. Ethan lingered behind them, uncertainty etched across his face. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said finally, "but I hope we can move forward." I studied him for a long moment before answering. "We can. The past doesn't have to define us anymore." Later, as the ceremony began, Lucas squeezed my hand. "They are proud of you," he murmured. "I'm proud of me," I replied, and for the first time, I truly meant it. The ribbon was cut, cameras flashed, and applause filled the air. As I stood before the crowd, I thought of the night I had left home with nothing but a suitcase and a shattered heart. Every betrayal, every sleepless night, every hard-fought victory had led me here, to this moment of undeniable triumph. After the event, I wandered through the building alone, running my hand over the smooth glass walls. In one of the executive lounges, I found my mother staring out at the skyline. "You've built an empire," she said quietly, "all without us." "Not without everyone," I corrected. "I had people who believed in me, and I learned to believe in myself." She turned to me, her expression soft. "I'm glad you did." In that moment, I felt something settle inside me. The longing for her approval, the ache of Claire's betrayal, the sting of Ethan's rejection, they no longer held power over me. I had closed the circle. That evening, Lucas and I returned home. As we sat on our balcony, watching the city lights twinkle like stars, he slipped an arm around me. "Do you feel it?" he asked. "What?" "Freedom," he said with a smile. "You finally let it all go." I nodded, leaning into him. "I do. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had turned my pain into purpose, my heartbreak into strength, and my story into a legacy that would outlast us both. I had come full circle, and as I looked at Lucas, at the life we had built together, I realized something profound. I hadn't just proven them wrong. I had proven myself right.